to kick off, and we want to be very conscious of time. So what I'll do, I'll just try and see how best to position this so it minimizes screen. There, that looks good. So welcome, thank you everyone to the great mathematics debate, teaching procedures versus developing reasoning. And I'm Jared from Matific, joining you from Brisbane, and I'm glad to have people joining us at all different time zones all around the world today for what will be a very interesting session. We've got an agenda which I'll try my best to keep us to time. Pam and Toni have both graciously agreed that if we need to, we can run an extra 15 minutes, but also conscious that our attendees may also need to leave. But remember, everyone will receive the recording. So if you don't, if you can't stick around at the end, you won't miss out. You will get the recording and you can come back and visit all the great things talked about today. So there's our rough agenda that we'll try and time-wise keep to. And it's my great pleasure now to introduce to you our two wonderful presenters for today. Firstly, we got Toni, who's currently Director and Lead Consultant for Coglearn and the Executive Director of Education and co-founder of Mastery Schools Australia. Toni served as a teacher in early childhood, primary school and secondary school, a regional advisor for mathematics, a head of curriculum, a deputy principal, a principal and a director of education. That's quite a list. And Pam is the author of several mathematics teacher resource books, curricular materials and a PD book for leaders. She's the former secondary school mathematics teacher and Texas State University lecturer. She's a K-12 mathematics education consultant, a teaching with technology instructor, and she's the author and co-author of several professional development workshops. So welcome and thank you, Toni and Pam.
Thank you.
So what we're going to do, we're going to start with Toni taking 2 to 3 minutes to provide an opening statement and then Pam to do likewise. Over to you, Toni.
Thank you. And look, thank you for having me today and enjoy this robust conversation, I'm hoping. So I guess I'd like to start out by saying I really don't agree or adhere to this idea that math teaching is a dichotomy, that developing reasoning is versus teaching procedures or algorithms. I mean, the end goal for any teacher is that students are fluent, that they have the ability to reason with the subject within the subject of mathematics. The debate over teaching methods really centers on whether we prioritize, I guess, procedure or conceptual knowledge. However, both are intertwined. They're essential for deep understanding of mathematics, with many researchers, well before myself, such as Daniel Ansari and Dr. Sarah Powell. I think she's from your region, Pam. Research validated effective mathematics teaching practices include explicit instruction. So it's modeling, it's guided practice, fader practice towards independent practice of new content. It's retrieval of previously taught material to allow for the repeated practice and space learning that we need to go from teachers taught it to students have learned it. Students also need to develop fluency in mathematical facts and procedures as a body of knowledge that belongs in higher order math problems and reduces the cognitive load for students when they are working at those problems. So when teaching procedures, we're not only teaching an efficient algorithm, but we're also using those visual and concrete visual representations and models that build a really clear link between the concept and the process. Again, there's been lots of research around this idea of using multiple representations and visual supports that are embedded in the instruction alongside when we teach step-by-step procedures. And these really help students increase their conceptual knowledge and strengthen their procedural knowledge and enable students to think more flexibly when they're doing mathematical tasks. We often hear this idea of working as a mathematician, yet a mathematician's an expert with a vast body of knowledge and a strong math background. However, most of the students that we're teaching, whether it's elementary school or middle school, they're almost always novices. They're not experts. So to build confidence early in our students means lots of scaffolding, that students get really early success. And the more knowledge they have of this body of math means that they're able to build these generalizable pattern understandings that allows for more cognitive demanding problems. So research indicates that early success in math is predicative of future performance, highlighting the need for high quality instruction that combines both procedural and conceptual knowledge.
Lovely. Thank you, Tony. Over to you, Pam.
I was driving home and I was troubled. I was concerned. I had just had a conversation with my children's teachers. They said to me, "Hey, Pam, we've been getting the message loud and clear to not give kids math anxiety. So stop giving them time fact math tests." Well, we don't want to give kids math anxiety. So we stopped giving them timed fact math tests. But now we're noticing they don't know their facts anymore. Is that a problem? As a high school secondary math teacher, I said, that's a problem. Kids need to know their facts. But just like you, I also don't want to give kids math anxiety, so I was troubled. I drove home. I walked in my house. I smelled something cooking. My kid's home. I said, hey, you. I think to myself, do you know your multiplication facts? He's in year 4, year 5. I chose one at random. Do you know your fives? I'll never forget. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, no. Math teacher mom, panic. If my kid doesn't know his multiplication facts, maybe none of the kids know their multiplication facts. And I was ramping and he could tell. And he said, Mom, you don't have to know your fives if you know your tens. I said, what? He said, you don't have to know your fives if you know your tens. I said, I heard what you said, but I don't know what you mean. Give me an example. He said, okay, let's say that you don't know 5 times 9. Well, 10 times 9 is 90, and 5 is half of 10, so half of 90 is 45. I said, good heavens, does that work all the time? Give me another example. He said, okay, how about 5 times 23? Not the example I was thinking of. Y'all, I was thinking about single digit facts, and he's found a pattern to find 5 times anything. Like, do it with me. What is 10 times 23? 230? Well, if 5 is half of 10, then what's half of 230? 115? Is that 5 times 23? Anybody kind of want to check? Y'all, in that moment, I was really clear that the mental actions my personal kid was doing were completely different than the mental actions that my high school students were using. They would wait until I gave them a rule and the steps, and then they would rote memorize and mimic those steps. But he was using relationships to reason through problems, not some vague thinking better, but owning and actually using mathematical relationships to logically deduce. And I wondered, could we create that intentionally in students? Because to be clear, he didn't have newfangled teaching. He had the same old, just like I had, rote memorizing and mimicking. For whatever reason, he could take a low dose of important relationships and patterns, the same low dose that we all got, and that low dose was enough for him. So I dove into the research. I read journal articles and research studies. Because of my background in higher math, I was able to sift through the less helpful research and find that there's a real mathematics, mathing way to teach, where we give our students a high enough dose in the important relationships that they need to mathematize the way mathy people actually do. I'm Pam Harris, and I believe that math is figure outable, and we can teach it that way. For the past 20 years, I've been helping teachers and leaders just like you learn a better way. Thank you for the opportunity to help more people realize what that can look like.
Thank you, Pam. So now what we're going to do now is run through hopefully up to 5 questions and give each speaker 2 minutes to talk about their response to that question, and then an extra minute for a little bit of discussion. So excuse me, Toni, over to you first. What do you see as the goal of mathematics education in 2025?
Look, I guess the goal of mathematics, of course, is for students to be confident and successful in maths. I mean, that's any teacher's goal in mathematics. But that's just a direct byproduct, really, of a more important goal, and that is that teachers can teach math well. That math is a cumulative subject, yeah, and that needs to be taught explicitly based on what we know how students learn. What do we know from cognitive science? What do we know from the evidence-based practices of how we actually learn, not just mathematics, but anything per se. So the goal is for teachers to be confident. They're able to teach math in the most efficient way an effective way. Because one of the, I think the things that I find when I work with schools is that the teachers will always complain, I don't have enough time. You know, time is our enemy. We've got a really overloaded curriculum. We've got all this content we need to cover, and we don't know, you know, it's trying to fit it all in. So when we're teaching students anything, and this isn't just mathematics, we need to find efficient ways of teaching. And modeling, that explicit instruction, we're modeling and then practice and reducing the scaffolds, that's actually a really efficient way. I mean, I know Pam mentioned in her opening statement about this idea of mimicking. Well, what's mimicking? Mimicking is me modeling something and the student actually going, oh, right, so this is how you do it, and help and going through the steps with me. So yes, copying those steps, mimicking those steps initially, but then as we guide that, you know, that scaffold away from the students, they actually make those links, but we've got to make those links for our students. So the goal for teachers is to be confident. They use the most efficient and effective way to teach. They use evidence-supported practices from what cognitive science actually tells us we know helps anyone learn anything. When we're teaching novices, we're not teaching experts here. We're teaching novices. So when it's new content, certainly a different concept if you've got a whole heap of experts. We can certainly work from an investigation first. We can go from the you do first. But when working with novices, we really need to go from that explicit modeling. And yes, mimicking to start with in the beginning stages.
Thank you, Toni. Pam, what do you see as the goal of mathematics education in 2025?
Yeah. First, I'm just going to stipulate that I think I want to invite everybody tonight to agree that we both want what's best for kids. And we both want what's best for teachers, as we both want what's best for kids. So we're just going to start. Yeah, I'm going to start with sort of that. Like I'm going to give the onus. Like we're after what's best, both of us. So then, what's different about what we're advocating? Would you consider that when we teach kids to read, they read? When we teach kids to write, they write. They do the actions of a reader and they do the actions of a writer. And we don't call them an expert author when they're writing, but they are actually doing the mental actions of writing. When we teach kids to do math, I invite you to consider we don't have a verb for that very well. Maybe I should, I'm aware I'm talking to a lot of Australians and New Zealanders, so maybe I should say maths. But when we teach kids to do mathematics, what's the verb for that? What's the verb that describes the mental actions that it means to math, to mathematize, we don't have a good word for that. I would submit to you that I was a really good rote memorizer and mimicker. It's what I did as a student. My teachers taught me exactly what Toni's advocating. I did a lot of drills. I did a lot of personal work to get things repeated. To me, addition meant lining stuff up and doing a bunch of column addition of digits, digit addition. Multiplication meant lining numbers up, and then I had to remember whether I was going to move the decimal or like at the end, or is that where I lined them up, or is that where I move? And I had to sort of remember that, but I did that well. I wrote, memorized, and mimicked really well. I got expert marks for doing that. Imagine my surprise, kind of chagrin, but also excitement when I began to, I think it had something to do with the fact that I birthed this kid, that he came for me, that it gave me the courage to go, wait, like, what are you doing? And the more I realized what he was doing, the more I could hear what other people were doing. And the more I realized they weren't rote memorizing and mimicking at all. To be really clear, I'm talking right now about my young son when he was in first grade and came home with a paper that said subtraction with regrouping. And there were no marks on the paper. There was no working out on the paper, just answers. And I said, dude, are you cheating? And he said, yeah, I didn't really understand what my teacher was doing, so I made up my own way. Well, from my background, I said, that's not a thing. You can't make up your own way. I had to do algebra off to the side to make sure that his creation of a strategy would work every time. It would. Sometimes it's funny because I'm now kind of considered an expert in numeracy, but I jokingly suggest I actually had negative numeracy. That it took me saying, wait, like, tell me more about that, and diving into discussing not only with mathematicians who I have definitely interviewed, but also students, children, young children, to say, well, wait, what do you know? And how are you using what you know to reason to find other things. And what I found is there's actually a small set of major relationships that mathy people only, they, for whatever reason, I don't know if we agree on this, but I think people have a natural talent in things. Some people are better basketball players. Some people are better artists. Some people have an inclination to produce music. I think some people can get a low dose of mathematical relationships and they can pull them together and reason using those. Most of us, pick me, need a higher dose. But what I ask you to consider is what we don't need a higher dose in is rote memorizing and mimicking. What we need a higher dose in is the important connections. I mentioned one of them earlier. 5 is half of 10. You don't have to know your 5s if you know your 10s. That doesn't mean that I want students to every time work out 9 times 5. I'm hoping we do that enough that actually it becomes an automatic fact for them. But notice if I get 9 times 5 using 5 is half of 10, I don't just get 9 times 5. I get 23 times 5. I get anything times 5. In fact, I don't just get anything times 5. I get anything times 50 because I can find 100 of them and cut it in half to get.
I think
over time.
I might go to the next question because we're on to the time for that. And I think some further debate of this will come up and Toni can respond within that context. So what does a good lesson look like then, in your view, Toni, for achieving your goals in mathematics education?
Yeah, okay. So I guess, there's a large body of evidence that supports explicit instruction, not just learning maths, but learning anything. And not going down this discovery, oh, well, I've invented this and this, but how do we know it works every time? That's going to take a lot of test and check, where we actually can teach explicitly these methods, but actually make the connections for the students. Be the think aloud, be the teacher, lead the connections. Look, I would say that a math lesson really needs to start with some sort of retrieval practice of content that's already been explicitly taught. So opportunities for extra practice, opportunity for faded worked examples. So the cognitive demand of that practice is getting higher and higher. So it's not just a mimic, it's actually applying that. They're actually applying their learning, but they need lots and lots of practice. Part of that math block would also include some fluency practice, because no matter what, we need some automaticity of facts. Now, I'm certainly advocating using strategy. So when I teach multiplication initially in, a grade 1 or a grade 2 program, what we do with EMP is that there's definitely some connections. And the quickest way to find your 10 times tables is to look at place value and have a look at this place value chart and have the place value of, we can see those 6 10s is 60, rather than having to go, well, like I need to, count by 10s on my finger or skip count to 10s. The place value gives it really quick. Doing 2 times tables, doubles, instant. We got the strategy of doubles. If I know my doubles, I know my 2 times tables. So I'm certainly not opposed for strategies, and no teacher who's doing explicit instruction is opposed to that strategy. But the next part of this lesson, this explicit, new content lesson, is really based on systematic instruction, evidence-based in mathematics. This has been well researched by Swallow, by Ashman, Kalusia, like using worked examples. But explicit instruction is not just telling students, it's not just getting them to mimic or do a rote. It's absolutely so much more nuanced than that. It's a back and forth interaction. I'm sure you've all heard of I do, we do, you do, but it's more than that. And it's not this linear. It's I do, you do, I do, you do, I do, you do. It's continuously support. It's highly interactive, because what we need to do is be able to give feedback, where we're consistently asking students while we're even modeling is not just what questions, but how do you know questions, or why questions? That's a true explicit teaching model. For some reason, there's this idea that explicit teaching is this traditional rote and just mimic an algorithm, and it's not. It's so much more than that. This feedback is the most important thing that teachers can do, because we're constantly looking for the misconception. So when I get students in a lesson, in the early part of a lesson, to do lots of their answers on a whiteboard, I'm getting to see every student's thinking. I'm getting to see their misconceptions. I can address their misconceptions in real time. So effective explicit math teaching includes multiple representations. And I think this is where it gets lost in this people's idea of, well, we're just going to follow this step-by-step process, because it's more than that. It's having drawings, it's showing images, it's showing tens frames, it's showing place value charts alongside an algorithm. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an example. So say, I just wanted to, actually, I'll park that for a minute. I want to learn anything. It's my birthday last week. Hey, happy birthday to me. And my husband bought me this Garmin watch. Yeah, it's my birthday present. And I get this Garmin watch and it's supposed to do all these really good bells and whistles. And it's supposed to do all this information, except I didn't really know how to use it. So what am I going to do? Am I going to read the manual? That's 85 pages long. Probably not. I'm going to do what any good person does now. They go onto YouTube. So I find a YouTube clip about this Garmin watch of how to use it. And what did I do? It was 58 minutes long. I'm not watching the whole thing. I'm not listening to 58 minutes and then going back. I'm actually watched a little part of it. I paused it. I stopped it. I had to go using my watch. I then watched the next bit. I went back and I did it. And that's a really good example of model practice, model practice, model practice, and making links along the way. So it's how we learn anything. There's a really good book that Carl Hendrick and Paul Kirshner put out. And it's called How Learning Happens. And it sort of collates all this research about how we actually learn something when we're learning something new, not just mathematics. And it's basically saying that these principles are that model practice work for all of us. And Dr. Sarah Powell, I really like it. I think I watched a podcast of her a couple of months ago, and she said, really, should we do things differently in the math classroom than what we do in our regular lives? And that's how we'd learn something in our regular life, anything that we start to do. The other thing I probably want to add to that is you need to have some early success. If we don't have success early, if we let kids struggle, or we let, those kids like your son, obviously he's got some really good mental, like the fact that he can halve 230 and come up with the fives is great. But what about the kids who don't have that? So let's have open the playing field with those kids who don't have those good mental models yet. We make the connections by showing the frameworks, the visual representations, connect it to them. So we open the playing field for them so that they can develop those things as well.
And for you, what should a good lesson look like?
Excellent. So one of the things I'd like to just briefly touch on is the difference between social knowledge and logical mathematical knowledge. So just a little Piagetian for a second. Jean Piaget suggested that there's things that we decide by convention that sort of society has deemed to be so, and that's kind of social conventional knowledge. And then there's another kind of knowledge that we really have to experience in order for us to be able to use it well. So if we just want someone to mimic something, then we can treat it like social knowledge, and we can drill it, and we can tell kids, and then they can repeat it. But if we admit that there is a logical mathematical type of knowledge, then it really doesn't do to just tell. So interesting. I think, Toni, I actually agree with you that there are times in a classroom where we need to just tell kids stuff, and that's when something is social conventional. The amazing thing that I learned later in life is that much of mathematics isn't social. It's the way I learned it. I learned it all as if it was social, that multiplication facts were a disconnected set of facts, and that mathematics was about mimicking rules and procedures. Again, I did that really well, and I got really good marks for it. Then imagine the fun in my life when all of a sudden I realized, oh, I can actually use relationships and connections like I'm seeing young children do with young math, that I can use what they know so we can actually open the door to mathematics to kids who don't memorize well. I'll call him out just a little bit. My husband is not a great, or at least he wasn't as a child. He was not a great memorizer. He watched a sample lesson, what it could look like to teach. Is kind of why I wanted this question in the debate. Like, what does it actually look like to do the kind of call and response and retrieval that Toni's suggesting? And when he watched that, he was like, wow, as a kid, I would have been trying to figure out what's going on here, and I would have been too slow to repeat back much of what's happening. If you would have looked at his whiteboard, it probably would have been blank. And if you were to try to fix his misconceptions that you're calling misconceptions, which I think you mean steps in a procedure, if you were to try to fix those, they were pretty nonsensical because he didn't do a good job of memorizing what he didn't understand, which is, I think, it's interesting that we take the students who, we both want what's best for students. But when you take students who don't typically memorize well and you base everything on drilling so that it's all based on rote memory, what if we actually had them? Let me be really clear. Here's what my learning experience does not look like. It doesn't look like sending kids off and saying, hey, go figure that out on your own. I hope you guess it well. Go ahead. Like, just go try. there's this procedure that we all know, and I'm gonna withhold it from you. I'm gonna be mean, and I'm gonna like hope that you sort of guess what we've already created, and I'm gonna like let you struggle until some point where you kind of guess correctly. Not at all. What if we could do things like, is 9 times 8 important? Absolutely. Do I want kids to know 9 times 8? Sure. I could have them drill that and rote memorize 9 times 8 as a disconnected 1-point fact. But what if we dealt with 9 times 8 like 10 times 8? Can we think about, I had the kids figure out 10 times 8. Hey, mom, you don't have to know your 5s if you know your 10s. Well, guess what? You don't have to know your 9s if you know your 10s. So can I have a kid think about 10 8s to help them think about 9 8s? Now, here's the lesson. If I said, hey guys, what's 10 times 8? Sure, we can use place value to help them figure out times 10. Then can you think about 9 8s? And then we can discuss that. And like Toni said, we can make a picture of that in a couple of different ways. But then could we also then say, could you use that to think about 90 8s? And if you've thought about 90 8s, could you then think about 89 8s? And I could let kids figure that however they want. But then my next question is going to be another often missed fact. What about 6 times 7? We could share a couple strategies for that. Again, I want to do this often enough that a lot of these single digit facts become automatic, but we get it in such a way that then the next question is, can that help you think about 60 times 7? Well, if you can think about 60 7s, can you then think about 59 7s? Now notice I've just given kids a very carefully, purposefully planned sequence of questions. And then I might say, hey, based on the pattern that we've got up here, what would you be the two? I've just given you some helpers. I did 9 times 8 that helped you with 90 times 8. And then you guys figured out 89 times 8. Then I gave you 6 times 7 and then 60 times 7. Could use that to help you think about 59 times 7. Then I might say, as a sort of ending this part of the lesson, based on the pattern that we've just done, what kind of helpers could you create to figure out something like 79 times 7? What would be maybe the single digit fact that would lead you to think about 80 7s that you could think about 79 7s? Notice, by having kids actually develop mathematical relationships, we don't just get the single digit facts at kids' fingertips. We get multiplicative reasoning, which is part of mathematical reasoning. We get kids actually reasoning about groups, not just doing a bunch of single digit multiplication. You might find it interesting. I'm actually anti-algorithm. Algorithms are amazing human achievements, but they're terrible teaching tools. I'll end with that.
Well, let's go on to that one at that point. So now, Toni, do algorithms inhibit or develop conceptual understanding? And then Pam, we'll hear why you are not in favor of algorithms.
I find this comment a really misleading comment. This idea that it harms, they inhibit learning or inhibit social. And I'm looking at some of the comments and I'm listening to Pam, and I'm listening to Pam say, we need to make connections. If we know what 7 times 9 is, and we're going to know what, 70 times 9 is, well, of course we are. And Pam continually talks about practice. Well, that's exactly what, under the guise of rote, practice is. It's practice, model. And the more you practice something and it becomes automaticity, it becomes a body of knowledge that you then can use and generalize. So we're actually saying the same things. So, I'm finding it very strange that, I think the comments are very much saying a traditional math. What's traditional math? Explicit instruction is not traditional math. Explicit instruction is modeling practice, making the connections really clear for students, giving them opportunity to get relationships, looking additive and multiplicative thinking. It's giving those relationships. That's what, I guess, nuanced explicit instruction is. All right, back to this idea of algorithm. So evidence continues to tell us that knowledge matters, yeah? And algorithms as a sequence of mathematical instructions, so yes, there's definitely a step-by-step process, but it becomes part of this body of knowledge in the domain specific to mathematics. Like, it is just part of it. We can't just all of a sudden pretend we don't have algorithms. They've been there for a long time through history, and they're there to efficient and effective way to solve problems and to process data. And I have to think of, I just read a recent paper, it's probably only about 2 days ago, reading something on the plane coming over to New Zealand. And it was called, it's only just been published, it's called The Memory Paradox, Why Our Brains Need Knowledge in the Age of AI. And it's by Barbara Oakley and colleagues. And it had a really interesting way of saying knowledge and skills, i.e. understanding of processes, may be separate in curriculum documents, and we often see this, and people like to separate thinking and reasoning from procedure, where actually they're actually intertwined. One supports the other and both strengthen each other, but they're not separate in our brain. And they go on to say that neuroscience shows that facts and skills actually work together. And they suggest that any pedagogy that downplays memorization, but memorization where students then get to apply that knowledge because it's no longer just a rote, and nowhere in explicit instruction would an advocate ever say we should just do rote practice or we should just do practice of algorithms without showing the really clear concepts. I think one of the, in the chat, someone said, but can't we just do both? Of course we can do both. And that's what I'm advocating, is actually about doing both. But we can't just get rid of algorithms. So they suggest that anything that downplays this has begun, and this is what their research is saying, long-term fluency and mental flexibility. So mathematics, we need deliberate practice. We need repeated retrieval. This practice that, Pam was saying, if we get these single digits, we actually can apply that to a lot of other things because we can see the relationships. This is why, a chess player instantly recognizes patterns. Chess is a really deep thinking game. How do we get good? Well, we don't start with the deep thinking, higher level strategies. We start with the very small moves. We practice some moves. We do them again and again. We learn through repetitions. We start seeing patterns. We start linking patterns, and our knowledge builds. And then we become the grandmaster. But the grandmasters have this, big knowledge body of all these patterns. So the idea that learning procedures, i.e. algorithms, should come after concepts, or in some fields, not at all. It really concerns me that we're holding back a very important specific knowledge piece of mathematics. The dichotomy is false. Concepts and procedures reinforce each other, and the research continues to support that. So when we teach, when taught using explicit instruction, where we put these things together, we make the links, we have the think alouds, so students can make those generalizable rules of knowing those single digit and apply them to double digit multiplication. They strengthen each other over time. And we use worked examples that we fade over time so students actually do apply the thinking. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an example. So if I'm going to teach, subtraction with regrouping, I want to do that in tandem, but there's a whole lot of work that goes before that. So the team at EMP, so, my writing team at Explicit Mathematics Program, it's about the sequence of mathematics that needs to be taught before we do this subtraction with regrouping. So what would we do? Well, we need visual representations of algorithms. We need this concept of, is there enough? So 7 take 9, is there enough? No. So if there's not enough, then we can't do it. As we
In middle
build...
school, there is.
Sorry?
Sorry, in middle school, 7 subtract 9 is -2.
Sure, but
Carry
if
on.
I'm teaching...
Sorry for interrupting.
Sure, but if I'm teaching year 2, no. So they actually need to know those rules in year 2. I'm not going to teach year 2 into integers. So then we go into regroup. So then we look at this concept of, this place value fact. So the place value fact, 50 equals 50 plus 3. But if we do a regrouping place value fact, then it would be 53 equals 40 plus 13. So students have got all this preconceptual knowledge of understanding that we can regroup and partition and pull apart numbers at 50 plus 3, but we can also do a grouping place value of 40 plus 13. So by the time we get to an algorithm that's saying 35 minus 17, and in our program it's sitting in, an early grade 2, in a vertical algorithm, they've got this preconceptual knowledge piece of place value. They've got this preconceptual knowledge already of subtraction. Where do they work from? They work from the ones first. They've got an idea of it, 5 minus 2. Do we have enough? No, regroup. Let's regroup 35, 1, 10 less, 10 ones more, and then we solve the problem. We also need to add sequencing problems that guard against autopiloting. And I think this is what some of your listeners or, people who, along with you, Pam, this piloting of just following a process. Well, it's not about following a process. It's actually the decision-making point. So it's asking the questions and having students think about that. So we want to offer examples and non-examples. So we're getting students to do the thinking.
The thinking about the procedure.
And that's, well, with you, Pam, this might be the last question we do because we've taken longer to get partway through question 3 than I'd allowed for 5. I'll show what those other 2 questions are. But then, of course, you've got closing statements at the end. So, Pam, your view on algorithms?
Yeah, would you consider that if my goal as a high school math teacher, a secondary math teacher, is to get students to reason about functions and relations and graphs and tables and transformations. And in order for them to get to reason about that, that's built on and based on proportional reasoning. And it's estimated that 90% of adults don't reason proportionally. And I'm going to suggest that's in part because that's built on based on multiplicative reasoning. And if we haven't built multiplicative reasoning, it's going to be super hard to build proportional reasoning and really hard to build functional reasoning because they're based on each other. And that multiplicative reasoning is based on additive reasoning. So one of the reasons that I talk about the traps of algorithms, and it would be really much better for everyone's cognitive load right now if I could write this down. But if you could picture just doing some multiplication, I'll just do a multiplication example. So earlier I talked about problems like where we could do something like 50 times, pick your favorite number, 27. I could line those numbers up and I could think about single digit facts. But every time I think, if I use a traditional algorithm, which by the way, when you mentioned that algorithms are a part of our body of knowledge, I would just maybe ask you which algorithms. So like my mom grew up in Switzerland. She used to learn a completely different set of algorithms than I did here in the States. And there's completely different sets of algorithms in Latin and South America. So you might have to choose which algorithm. But anyway, all of the basic arithmetic algorithms are based on turning the problems into single digit computations. If I choose a multiplication algorithm and I think about that first single digit multiplication, I could successfully do that using additive thinking. I could do that multiplication, that single digit, whatever that first number is. I could skip count to get that. And a lot of kids can do that really quickly. Or even worse, I could pull it from rote memory with no connection whatsoever. And I could then do the next one in the same way. And I could then do all of these single digit additions, counting by ones. And I could get the correct answer to a pretty sophisticated multiplication question, never using any thinking higher than additive thinking. I could look like I'm a multiplicative reasoner, but I got the answer using additive thinking and maybe even counting strategies, which means what I haven't had you do is get your brain strong enough to actually reason multiplicatively. Let me give you one more quick example. If we're going to add and I line numbers up, and I've got those numbers that I'm going to do single digit additions. I could pretty quickly count by ones. I could do the subtraction that Toni talked about, where I could say to myself, what is 2 subtract 5? And then instead of asking myself, do I have enough? I could actually ask about, I don't remember what your numbers were, but 52 subtract 5. Hey, then I have enough. So when I do that single digit stuff, I could actually count by ones the whole time. Counting is even less sophisticated than additive thinking. Algorithms can trap students into looking like they're using the level of reasoning that the problems are intended to develop and be used, where they're actually getting away with using less sophisticated reasoning. Many, if not most students can get trapped in algorithms, just repeating the steps successfully. There's no misconceptions for the Toni's feedback because they're getting them right. I'm showing you my whiteboard and I'm getting them all correct, but I'm using a less sophisticated reasoning, and it's super hard to tell that in if what we're doing is trying to get students to just mimic algorithms. Really quickly, there's a lovely research study by Ann Dowker who went to mathematicians and said, if you'll solve these lovely problems, then we'll sort of like note how you do that. What percent of the time do you think mathematicians use a traditional algorithm to solve these problems? I mean, they're mathematicians, so maybe 50% of the time, maybe 75% of the time. 4% of the time. Almost never did they actually mimic an algorithm. That's not, those aren't the mental actions that mathematicians use. Now I know Toni's going to say, yeah, they're experts, and so of course they do something different. But I can actually have students do the same thing. I can ask students younger math where we are dealing with like addition. We could say, hey, what's 36 plus 10? And get kids thinking about that place value pattern. And then I could say, well, if you know 36 plus 10, can you think about 36 plus 9? But then I can use that same pattern to say, if you got 147 plus 30, figure that out. Could you use that to help you think about 147 plus 29? What if I even said something crazy like, what if I had 4,328 plus 1,995? Nobody just kept all that in there. I wish I could write this down to relieve everybody's cognitive load. But could it just be that big number, 4,328 plus that second number was 1,995? Is that just like adding 2,000 and backing up? Here's my point. My point is, my research has been, if not algorithms, then what are we teaching kids? And the good news is there's only a small set of major relationships that lead to a small set of major strategies that we can get young students very successful with additive reasoning and multiplicative reasoning into proportional reasoning and into functional reasoning. And they're actually using the mental actions of mathing, of mathematizing their world, not expecting them to rote memorize and mimic boredom. And then hopefully someday they'll actually apply it. Nah, let's get them doing the mental actions of mathing right now.
Okay, so what we're going to do is I'll show you what the other two questions were. The speakers may like to address this within their closing statements or in response to your questions. So of course, we reached the maximum level with the Zoom, and we have other people who are joining us on via Facebook and sorry, YouTube, and there are questions there too. I said I'm happy to keep my little presentation now on Matific short, but I also want to make sure Toni and Pam, you both got enough time to decide what you'd like to address in the Q&A. But I think even without us going through those questions 4 and 5, now we're probably going to need that extra 15 minutes as it is. And thank you, this is fascinating. I'm going to have to re-watch this in the recording because I feel a bit moment like the Gary Larson comic with the little fella saying, "Can I be excused? My brain is full." So I'll let you now have some time to look at those questions while I tell people a little bit about Matific. And I know there were people with us who are familiar with Matific, but also people are new to it. And a lot of this will be about what is new. But if you're not familiar with Matific, it is a game-based maths platform for students. It's a supplementary resource. So it's not a core program. Toni's referred to, like, for instance, her explicit maths program. I'd see that as a core program, as is, say, in Australia, we have Oxford Maths, for instance, and in New Zealand, similarly. They're core programs, where a supplemental resource can be used with any core program or independently of them. So we have them aligned to whatever curriculum you use. So you can look up our content via your curriculum or those particular textbook series that we have, and we do alignments upon request to other series. We use AI to auto-assign activities, and students are indicated or allocated a learning level. So the activities they get are at their own personal level. Teachers can do that manually, but it can also be auto-operated. I'll show you a bit more about that in a moment. And then we have a comprehensive reporting system that doesn't just give you scores, but gives you information about how the students are tracking across the year levels and concept mastery. Recently, Time magazine reviewed over 7,000 edtech companies and then shortlisted the top 350. And I'm very happy to say Matific came in at number 29 on that list. I haven't looked closely at what the 28 before Matific are, but I don't think they're student maths platforms. So that possibly means, in their opinion, we are the best student maths platform globally. We certainly are in lots of different countries and in different languages, which I'll come back to. I just saw one example of an activity I put up, and I deliberately chose one that shows over here to the right, a standard algorithm. But just showing that one of the things that drew Matific to my attention was the fact that when it dealt with this, and whether you are in favor of algorithms or not, a lot of teachers are in a situation where their curriculum requires them to teach them. But what was important for me was that students were seeing the conceptual understanding there behind the algorithm, that when they're multiplying 3 here by 1, they're in fact actually looking at what are 3 lots of 10 and using that area model to bring that conceptual understanding out. The Matific platform allows teachers to set their focus topic, and then that topic applies to the activities assigned to the students for the specified period of time at their actual learning level. Currently, you can only set one topic for one time period, but by the end of the year, that feature will be further developed where teachers can set multiple topics for multiple time periods. So they can schedule their topics and know the students are getting activities on their topic at their level. Sarah, I'll leave questions to the end, or I can put it chat just because of the time aspect. One of the recent features we added in the arena section of Matific where students can play the activities as a competitive game. We brought in multiplayer games. Now, you always can have multiple players in an arena game, but these, as the 2P indicates, would be limited to 2 players, some are 2 to 8 players, but allows for more experience or interaction in the experience with the students actually taking turns in the actual games, rather than simply completing the activity independently and then saying, okay, let's see who got the best score and the best time. In terms of accessibility, there are standards now to which online platforms need to be compliant. And so you'll find on our website now and on the teacher platform, if you click on that icon, I'll just go back to that one, that little icon there it's pointing to, you can see how the platform has been revised in order to cater for people with certain, say, visual requirements in order to view the platform. Very soon, you'll be able to apply that to individual students. So just as at the moment, you can change the language into 40 plus languages for each student in your class. If you've got a very diverse class linguistically, you'll soon be able to decide who needs that accessibility mode. So how are you feeling, Toni and Pam? Are you ready to take turns at responding to a question or two?
You bet.
Yep, sure.
Are we flipping a coin about who goes? Who's are you
Do you want
choosing?
to keep going in the same order, or
Sure.
up to you? And if you can talk about the same question, or you can talk about different questions. Toni, if you want to choose one that you saw someone bring
Sure.
up and respond to
There's
it.
lots. I mean, I think there's probably
yeah.
there's probably more statements than questions.
Okay.
But if I'm looking at a few of those questions, and you know, I probably pick out one, and that's this idea that time testing, it's got brought up earlier, causes anxiety. So, you know, this whole idea of math anxiety. Well, the core thing that causes math anxiety is weak math skills. So if you don't have a good, strong body of knowledge, you actually cause anxiety. When we actually time reading, what's the purpose of time fluency? We time fluency reading because it's a really good indicator through research that when students are able to read a certain number of words per minute at a level that they're reading at. So we're not giving them, you know, addition facts or multiplication facts that they haven't learnt yet. It's while they're learning the specific phonic code at that level of code, we time them in the testing, and in 1 minute we see, you know, are they meeting the expectations that we want words per minute at that level? And we use it because if they don't, it's a really strong indicator that that student's got some learning difficulties or some reading difficulties. And it's exactly the same with timed facts. If we time facts, we're timing students on the facts that they're actually working at. So we're not timing them above that. It's not pitting them against other students. And that information to a teacher gives them an understanding. If they're not able to do a certain amount within a minute, that student's likely going to have some difficulty with mathematics. And there's a whole body of research that supports that. So timed facts do not cause anxiety. When you quiz kids in front of other kids, when you publicly announce it, when you do those things absolutely cause anxiety. The other things that cause anxiety with math anxiety is teachers and parents. So when, you know, there is I think a research, Dr. Ansari again, I'm not sure of his colleagues, but they did a research around, you know, teachers who actually felt not very confident in mathematical teaching in the early years, and their own attitudes towards mathematics actually played out with their students. And so that the students' attitude towards mathematics actually was lower because of the anxiety that was felt by the teachers. Not just that, but even with parents. Like, I've been teaching for a long time, and you know, at the end of the year or middle of the year, I have an interview with my parents, sit with them to talk about their student and what's their student's goals. And I might say to parents, they're doing really well in this compound complex sentences, but we're really working on, their mathematics because they're having some difficulty with mathematics. They're not meeting the benchmarks that I would expect them to meet. And the parents will often say, oh, well, that's okay. I wasn't very good at math either. So giving this idea that only some people are good at math and some people aren't. So automaticity and fluency of procedural knowledge or fact knowledge actually gives the students this body of knowledge that they can then use to reduce the cognitive load when they're working at higher level mathematical tasks and investigations. So I probably will just leave on that one.
Thank you. Well, you managed to bring in parts of question 4 and 5. So well done there. And Pam, it's up to you. You can take over now, or take up on the same question, or if you've got another one in mind that you'd rather focus on.
There's two that are very related, and there's a lot, so I'm having a hard time following them all. But Graham, you mentioned, would you say your ability, so you asked me specifically, would you say your ability to see relationships or mathematize was aided by your having basic factual knowledge to draw upon? And then an anonymous person very similarly said, you talked about developing deeper mathematical reasoning skills as an adult when you were already considered an expert. So I'm aware that there's this expert novice research that's out there. To just be clear for everybody here, that is completely interpreted at the opposite ends of the spectrum. So both sort of sides of this argument will take that exact research and use it to substantiate their position. So I find it less helpful because both sides are, if I may be clear, what I'm suggesting is that we do need, a lot of people are saying, don't we just need both? Yes, I've read Rachel Lambert's work. Rachel's a colleague. She's excellent. But I don't know that it's a dichotomy of this or that. What I'm actually suggesting is we need to know what mathing actually means. That most of us maybe had the perspective that I had as a kid, which was to do math meant that I waited till somebody gave me what to do. I memorized that. I mimicked it and spit it back out. People are saying, well, you understand the algorithms. You get conceptual understanding after you memorize the algorithms. I mean, I actually understood the algorithms. I remember sitting, I remember where I was. I can tell you on the Brigham Young University campus when I had to figure out someone's age. And it was, I'll age myself a little bit. It was 1990 or 91, and the person was born in like 57. And I said to myself, ooh, I know how to do that problem. This is a subtraction problem. And so I need to line those numbers up. And then it's been a while since I'd done subtraction with regrouping. And I had to think about, I literally retaught myself the subtraction algorithm. I understood it that well. I could reteach myself how to do it because I was doing third semester calculus at the time. That's where my brain was. And that's how well I understood it. And that's how poor my numeracy was. It was so poor that I had no idea that I could just count up from 57 to 1990 to find out how old the guy was. So did I, as an adult with my previous rote memorized stuff, did that help me mathematize more? I actually think it inhibited it in a big way. So I've done tons of experimentation on thousands of children with thousands of teachers to say, what would it be like? Because I asked the same question. When I hit this moment in my life, I was like, then what would we do? If we don't do what didn't work for me and most of my classmates, whether we were I was good at it, or most of them that weren't good at it didn't get good marks, then what would we do? And that's been the work that I've done for 25 years. So I agree with Toni that we need both. There are times we tell, and there are times we give kids experience. And when I say we give kids experience, I don't mean what I think which is kind of why I wanted that question at the beginning, like actually describe a learning sequence. I don't mean that I'm going to throw kids out into the wilderness and say, sure hope you figure out math, that I have some preconceived idea that I just hope they guess. Not at all. I have very purposefully planned lessons, like I've done a couple today, to really help kids create mental connections. We need to do it enough. I agree with Toni on that. I think the main thing that we might disagree on is our goal of mathematics. I think Kim asked in the thing, what does success look like? Success to me is not just a bunch of answers quickly. Success to me is actually getting kids to perform the mental actions of mathematizing their world. And if that doesn't make sense to you, join the crowd. It didn't me either. I'd love to take you on that journey. All right, back to Toni.
So Toni, I think we probably won't have time for more questions, but if you want to respond, to what Pam just said, and I suppose that we're on the time to start moving into closing statements, so you could roll on into that if you like.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Look, thanks for the discussion, Pam. And I guess there's been a bit of back and forth and a continue I would probably say misleading, that this whole thing that, we've got to teach the algorithm and it's taught on its own. That's not explicit instruction. The explicit instruction that you're describing isn't my explicit instruction. So to me, these things really work in tandem. They support each other. No one has said, or no one in, we talk about camps and there should not be camps, because I don't agree with the dichotomy. Of course, I want students, I'm not going to call it mathematizing because I don't like that word, but of course I want students thinking and reasoning when they're applying their algorithms, when they're applying their thinking to reasoning, when they're applying the generalizable patterns from one algorithm to solving another problem. But you mentioned that you've done a research, thousands and thousands of students and teachers. I'd really like to read the research paper where you've got these thousands and thousands of students and teachers where you've gone through and ran controlled trials of this. But what I see is that I don't want people who are listening to this to be swayed by, you're harming students when you teach well, when you teach first, because we actually do need to teach first. We need to model practice. When you're using evidence-based practice of how we actually know from cognitive science that, the research tells us now that's how we learn. When we learn from countries that are doing it very well, like Singapore, and then we learn from countries, say, like the UK, and for a long time, they were following the same as USA, they were following the same as Australia, where these inquiry methods or investigation type methods just haven't been working, and that's been preempted. And so the UK went back. They went from, I think, 27th on the PISA scales to 11th under, the education minister, Sir Nick Gibb, where they changed what they did in mathematics to do a mastery model to make sure that students actually understood that and had a body of knowledge. They had the foundational skills down pat, and they went from 27th to 11th because they changed the way they do using models that are working in other countries really well. So, I don't want people to be swayed that they're doing harm to students or that they're doing it wrong or they're not doing real math. Yeah, we need to model, explicitly explaining, we need to make connections, we need to do think arounds, we need to give step-by-step scaffolded process where we connect the concepts, we support students connecting the concepts, and we use multiple representations. And by that, I mean pictorial representations, concrete materials, the things that we know. So we need to, break it down. Break the content down, the concepts down. We need to build students up. We need to help them succeed, because if students struggle early in mathematics, they opt out. And, you've talked about you're working with students. I've got 8 schools at the moment, over 1,000 students, and they're all at my school because they've been disengaged or at risk of disengagement from schooling. And most of them have difficulty in mathematics. And what they've had is failure in mathematics. And they've come from classrooms where they're supposed to mathematize, or they're supposed to make these connections on their own. And they're unable to do that. So they've struggled, and so they just opt out. Knowledge gives power. It gives certainty, and it supports self-efficacy. So having well learnt, embedded knowledge of facts, procedures that they can apply, that they can generalize, is all part of this body of knowledge of mathematics. And I think, I've read a few of the comments saying, you're sort of on the same team. I truly believe that we are. I guess that when we say things like, it's real math or not real math, or that algorithms harm students, I guess that's where we really differ. Because I think those things can be taught in tandem and they actually support each other.
Thank you, Toni. And Pam, your closing statement.
I completely agree that we are on the same team, that we want what's best for students. And I honor the work that you're doing, and the fact that everybody who's on tonight, thank you so much for dedicating your lives to making the lives of children better and helping them the best that you can. I would never suggest that anyone's harming students or harming children. I would suggest that there is an avenue. If you're interested, if the examples that I've given you tonight intrigue you at least a little bit, to think that maybe we could actually teach a math class that would be intriguing and interesting, that has actual content involved, that doesn't leave students wondering, doesn't leave them guessing. I would invite you to consider that we've both thrown around some terms that we haven't really had a lot of opportunity to define tonight. It's one of the reasons why I did actually the numbers that I suggested earlier, when I gave some problems and how I would suggest we could get kids reasoning multiplicatively, or when I gave the addition example of how we could get kids reasoning additively. Because I think it's kind of important, even when people are saying, like Toni said lots in the comments, I think you're both in the same. We are and we aren't. I think we both have the same aims. We want the success for students, but we do see getting at them, I think, quite differently. I know when you mention inquiry or other discovery methods, I don't know exactly what you mean by that. I've tried to describe what I don't mean and what I do mean by that. And I think that's part of our work to go forward. I think part of our work to go forward is to more clearly define what works best when and for what purpose. How do we define success in math class?
And for who? I would add to that, and for who? Novice first. Yeah.
Do you mean who's successful? For which part was?
No, I mean for who? For whose student? So
I mean, I want success for all students. I want success for students who don't memorize well, who that's not their talent. And no matter how much we drill disconnected sets of facts and drill procedure steps, they're not ever going to make sense of those. But what they can do
they're
is
taught
use what they
explicitly,
know.
though, Pam. They're not disconnected.
I'm not suggesting that they're disconnected. And see, when you say taught explicitly, I don't know what those words mean. Like we have to get, so I'm going to invite everybody that I think our task now is to get more clear on what it actually looks like in a math class to do, to teach best when you use the words taught explicitly. What does that look like? What does it mean? And when I use the words that I want to help students mathematize their world by giving them the most important small set of major relationships and strategies, I'm actually being very explicit about what those are. I'm being very purposeful in helping teachers learn those and giving them ways to help students learn those, where there's also going to be plenty of good practice, but it's going to be practice in maybe a different set of skills. It's not in a skill to repeat a bunch of steps. It's going to be in a different set of skills, the mental actions that mathy people actually use. So I would invite everybody tonight to I think you have some choices. If your goal is to get students to do kind of probably what you did in school, which was, or at least the way your teachers taught, which is here mathematics is a disconnected set of facts and its rules and procedures to mimic. And you want to do that well, then I think Toni's got some great strategies to help you do that, especially because she's not. She says she's going to connect things, and I think that would be pretty good. I think it would be kind of boring and not really connected to your life and experience. And anybody who can't rote memorize well they're going to try. You're going to try to help them, and they're going to struggle the most. But that is a valid choice. If, on the other hand, you're at least a little intrigued in the mental actions that I've suggested tonight, then there is actually a way to mentor students to mathematize their world. Then we offer a different route.
I might just conclude before I've got some final slides and housekeeping type things, but I can say to the audience, I've seen both these wonderful educators in action, either at conferences or through webinars, videos and books and so on. And I would certainly say, I think you are both very much about explicit teaching. I don't think, when this was first talked about,
depends on how you define it, right?
Yeah, and I thought, no, it's not about explicit teaching versus inquiry, because these people are both about explicit teaching. And I've seen that their lessons are very engaging either way too. Students are very much involved. It's not simply just the teacher in a transmission rather mode. But yeah, probably the difference comes in terms of disagreeing about what maybe the goal is of the lesson or what actually happens within those lessons. But they're certainly very well structured and engaging lessons. And I think it's interesting because I think it seems to me that Pam's concern is with the students who have trouble memorizing. Maybe Toni is concerned with the students who don't quite easily understand. But what we'll finish with is where you can learn more, because really it's I'm not at all going to get in here on adjudicating this. I'm simply the host and want to say, as educators yourself, thank you for taking the time in probably your summer break in the Northern Hemisphere and your winter short break in the Southern Hemisphere. We don't get a lot of time as teachers during the terms to actually step back and think about what we're doing. I think we're always just doing. And so hopefully there's been an opportunity for you to learn and reflect. And now if you want to know more about what Toni has to offer, you can see here there are email addresses, website, and there's a QR code. So hopefully you're getting time to scan that. And so Toni and her team has an explicit maths program that they've been developing. Toni, earlier in the year, I know the early levels were out, but you said you were still working on the upper levels. Is that still the status?
Yeah, so we've got foundation to grade 2 and year 3's just about finished, so it's ready for next year. So my fantastic team, Wendy Taylor, she's a math professor, and David Markunis, who many of you probably already know and has been on a podcast with Anna Stocky about the purpose for retrieval and reducing cognitive load theory. Yeah, so they're our team and they're riding hard.
Wonderful. And Toni has provided a gift for you all today. So there's a website there. What we might do, and one of my thank yous is to Amrita, who's in the background here, making sure this works for us and has been wonderful in getting this all organized for us. We can include this in the emails to these links. So if you miss them now, then you'll get another crack at these. But Toni's sharing this publication on the need for Speedway fluency accounts for maths learning. So there's a giveaway from Toni. And then if you'd like to know more about Pam and her offerings, Pam's website is mathsisfigureoutable.com. Math is figureoutable. Okay. And if you add the / big on the end, then that's where, which I've downloaded both people's documents already myself. There's a free ebook there on the most important numeracy strategies from Pam. So thank you both for your generosity in those giveaways. So again, we'll include those in the emails out if you have missed them now, but the email will give you the recording. Just a plug here for our people down under, or at least the Australian and New Zealanders, although we do a similar event soon in South Africa as well. They won't be on live because it's very early in the morning there, I think, but they'll be certainly watching the recording. The Matific runs an annual Maths Olympiad. We do them all around the globe. So this one coming up from August 11 to 15 is only for Australia and New Zealand. Registrations need to be through the schools. There are prizes to be won by the school, by the teachers, and by the students, as well as a chance for you to have some complimentary access to Matific and evaluate it as a possible platform for use in your school to supplement whatever core program you use. So there's that QR code for you. Again, if you're in other parts of the world, please don't register for this one, but do go to matific.com to learn more about Matific and look for when the Olympiads are running in those parts of the world. So finally, we'd love your feedback. So there's another QR code for you. Your camera's working overtime. If you wouldn't mind letting us know what you thought of today's webinar and suggestions for other topics. We don't always do them on mathematics, but sometimes we've done them on issues to do with ADHD. I think we've done ones on how to keep your own mental fitness as a teacher and so on. But it's just part of a service we offer to support you and inadvertently, hopefully raise the awareness of people out there who still don't know about Matific and how wonderful it is. So thank you, everybody. You will get certificates of attendance if you've been attending here live, and the recording will be sent out to everybody in the next week or so. Do check your spam and so on, because it may end up in one of those folders and you may think you haven't got it, but they will automatically go out to you. And follow up on those links and offerings from our two wonderful presenters today. Again, thank you, Toni, for interrupting your holiday in beautiful New Zealand, in Queenstown in particular. It's sort of my beautiful country and one of the most beautiful parts of a most beautiful country. And then you're probably starving for lunch because it's getting on into the afternoon there for you. And Pam's probably thinking, when will I go to bed? It's getting late here for me in Austin, Texas. You're both wonderful, and I appreciate the time you've given today on behalf of everyone.
Thanks, John. And thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Toni. Thanks,
Thank
John.
you all. Thanks.
Nice
Hi.
Rita, thank you very much.
Hi.
Rita.
Thanks, Rod.
Hope you feel
Thanks,
better.
John.